Mother, May I Sleep with Danger? Is a weird beast. It started as a generic thriller novel in 1996, written by Claire Rainwater Jacobs, about Jessica, the mother of a college girl, Laurel, discovering that her daughter is dating an abusive, murderous psychopath, Kevin, and her efforts to rescue her from him. It came in the wake of a similar 1996 film, Fear, and it was soon adapted into what many critics have called a knockoff of Fear, a cheesy Lifetime movie starring Tori Spelling as Laurel, and having more of a focus on her than Jessica. 20 years later, James Franco remade the movie as a lesbian vampire film, loosely incorporating elements from Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's 1872 novella Carmilla. It sort of follows the same beats as the original film, Tori Spelling now playing the mother, but the dangerous character that the daughter dates is now a lesbian vampire. It's like if Seth Rogen were to make an official, licensed remake of Fatal Attraction, but replace Glenn Close's character with Count Dracula. Why? Because James Franco likes ogling lesbian vampires. That's why. I've seen a lot of really bad vampire movies, and this isn't what I'd call a good movie, but neither is it one of the worst films. It's kind of just average in quality. Its main selling point is probably its sex appeal, and it knows how to play that up to a reasonable degree without being a trashy sexploitation film. It hits the right gothic aesthetic of modern vampire films, and reasonably recreates classic vampire erotic horror elements, with sensual bloodletting and what can be thought of as younger, hotter, and gorier takes on elements from Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, the 1936 film Dracula's Daughter, and the 1970 Carmilla film adaptation, The Vampire Lovers. I imagine the film's biggest audience is straight men and lesbians who watch for sex appeal and not much else. But what makes the film stand out from all the other crappy lesbian vampire films is an attempt at feminist thematic depth. James Franco conceived of the story, casted himself in a main role, shares half of the cover, and probably had a huge part in the creative direction as the executive producer. But the film was technically written and directed by two women. The film was written by Amber Coney, an actress with experience in horror, and directed by Melanie Aitkenhead, a former student of Franco's, who impressed him in being one of the 10 directors behind the film adaptation of his novel Actors Anonymous, a film whose gimmick is that 10 different directors needed to work together to produce a film that would function seamlessly from one director to another, without allowing the audience to become aware of any divergence. I suspect her ability to execute someone else's vision is what attracted Franco to her for the role as director of his pet project, Mother, May I Sleep with Danger. I also suspect that she's a lesbian. She at least generally seems to have an affinity for working with women. Franco would later put her in charge of the 2017 film Blood Ride, about female bikers. Franco himself is a strong advocate for the gay community, even though he's a straight man, and he has projected an image of being an ally of the Me Too movement, while himself being the target of sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations from no fewer than 7 women. He is a skeevy man, but he wants people to think that he's a progressive feminist ally. The result is this film, which is an excuse for sexy lesbian vampires, for Franco's male gaze, but is also kinda progressive with self-aware discussion of the vampire myth through a queer studies lens. The plot concerns a vampire clan loosely based on the Karnsteins from Carmilla, now rendered as a bunch of sexy goth girls who pretty much look the same. They do a similar femme fatale shtick as Carmilla, going after pretty girls with their lesbian predatory nature veiled under the pretense of gals being pals. Except that the modern age allows them to be out and proud about being lesbians. The whole deception element of the original novella and most adaptations is now gone, restricted to them hiding being vampires, not hiding being lesbians, and is, as a result, more progressive. It's not that girl you see as a friend is secretly a vicious lesbian who wants to eat you in more ways than one. It's That girl you see as your loving girlfriend is secretly a vicious vampire who wants to eat you in more ways than the one you want. It circumvents the notion of lesbian vampires as evil lesbians menacing straight girls, and makes it a lesbian genre equivalent to the original I'm dating a psychopath scenario. As much as I associate lesbian vampires with homophobia, I have to admit that the film does a good job at eliminating that subtext, mostly, and making it just a lesbian film with a vampire threat. If only James Franco weren't attached. The film starts with an unnamed blonde vampire femme fatale, played by Emma Rigby, seducing her human girlfriend Pearl, played by Emily Mead. The blonde vampire confesses her love for Pearl, and then they have sex. No, wait. First, they do a sexy photo shoot, with bizarre little cuts to the film negative to show when a photo is being taken. Can I assume that the transitions on Angel are caused by lesbian vampires somewhere in the city? Eventually they get tired of this, have sex, and then the blonde confesses a secret.
I'm a nightwalker. Okay, what's a nightwalker? Like a vampire.
It is, in fact, exactly like a vampire. The whole other label is unnecessary. It's not like in Blade, where we can compare her to a daywalker. Pearl doesn't handle the reveal very well, though at least she doesn't freeze up like Buffy does upon witnessing Angel's reveal. Pearl takes off running, showing that she has better instincts than the vampire slayer. Unfortunately, the blonde hunts Pearl down and bites her. Pearl fights back and kills her with glass through the heart. Okay, whatever. You're vampires, your rules. Before dying, the blonde tells Pearl that she will be a murderous vampire until she finds her one true love, thus turning Pearl into the sympathetic Carmilla figure. She runs off and transforms. The not Karnstein clan feeds her a captured man who assumes the traditionally feminine weak victim role and a very basic feminist spin on gender roles. It doesn't have the problematic framing of the monstrous feminine, which is to say that it's not from a male perspective, projecting fear of scary women. It's the rare female perspective of the vampire experience, with male vulnerability equivalent to that commonly suffered by female characters. 5 years later, Pearl does the Carmilla shtick as the Kevin figure on a college campus. The daughter character, now called Leah, played by Layla George, is a lesbian who uses the college environment to express her sexuality. Pearl goes after her as a supposedly harmless paramour, but without the element of a deceptive lesbian supposedly being straight. It's really just the Laurel-Kevin dynamic as lesbians. Leia is even an intelligent student who can analyze vampire fiction in a whole class of theme stating that elevates the film to a self-aware piece of intelligent progressivism, challenging its own genre. The original thriller film also uses this self-aware theme stating to give it a layer of feminist thematic depth. A class contains a discussion between Laurel and an English teacher about what a male author may be implying about feminism. She argues that the message is anti-feminist, and the teacher admits that she makes a compelling argument. This sets the theme of the successes of women versus men who want to keep them down, framing the conflict of Jessica and Laurel versus Kevin as a feminist struggle. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a cheesy Lifetime film, bad overall, but the feminist theme is decently presented. The remake draws from the classroom dynamic and turns it into a discussion on vampires. The critical analysis of vampires is one of my favorite subjects, and I love seeing it come up in a film. Notably, 2011's adaptation of Rachel Klein's The Moth Diaries did something similar with a discussion of Carmilla in a lesbian vampire film. The Mother May I Sleep with Danger remake goes a similar route, with discussion of the compelling nature of erotic horror with regard to the vampire figure. As I've discussed in my review of Season 1 of Scream Queens, erotic horror is compelling because of the dual nature of thrills presented. The thrill from something good, sex, and something bad, danger. This is what the title Mother May I Sleep with Danger evokes, and the class discussion describes this as the film's theme. The class discusses Dracula as erotic horror. The teacher, played by Ivan Sergey, who played Kevin in the original, says that this is what makes the vampire compelling. A student criticizes this suggestion because Twilight was popular without the element of danger. Edward was the nice, girly, friendly, sparkly gentleman, right? Leah shuts this down. She was a fan of the first Twilight and wants everybody to know that the first one was compelling, and then the series went downhill. According to her, it has everything to do with teen sex being dangerous. After the 20th century stopped teen pregnancy from being a death sentence, teen sex stopped being seen as dangerous and was thus less compelling. The first Twilight equated teen sex with violent vampire feeding and made it a compelling sleeping with danger dynamic. In the attempts to keep the series going, that main dynamic was lost. I would also suggest that because Twilight came out in a time of increased safe sex following the HIV epidemic, making teen sex dangerous again was a more pressing cultural vacuum than teen pregnancy being an acceptable outcome of sex. May I just say how refreshing it is to have a film have a level-headed discussion of Twilight? Something that actually acknowledges people can like it and not bashing it just because Edward sparkles and girls like it? Thank you! The teacher likes this point and goes on to a discussion of how vampires are the other and can be considered queer. Vampires are often used to demonize queer elements, as with the homoerotic interpretation of Dracula. He kind of alludes to the politics surrounding lesbian vampire movies, but focuses on the interpretation of Count Dracula as queer. Taking the scene on its own, it looks like a great feminist vampire film in the making. And then, of course, James Franco's creepy influence shows its ugly head. Leah is in a school production of Macbeth as a ginger-bent version of the titular character. She acts out a scene with Macbeth's wife, and their performance gets really queer. Itself a reflection of the queering of Mother, May I Sleep with Danger. I mean, awesome, right? Well, yes, but James Franco plays the drama teacher. Did I mention that 4 out of the 7 allegations of sexual harassment/assault came from his drama students? According to them, he became angry when 2 wouldn't go topless when doing a scene in front of him, and that he orally raped the other 2, as well as referenced other women who are too intimidated to come forward. He abused his position as a teacher to coerce women into becoming his sexual entertainment under the suggestion that he could advance their careers if they did what he wanted. So, to see him playing this drama teacher, watching students become amorous on stage, acting subdued because the character's totally not a sexual guy, but essentially being James Franco as a drama teacher, ogling his students when okaying them to play their roles, is just so metatextually creepy. But it's queer, right? Feminist, right? It wants to have its Laura and Eater too, and it can't. The Macbeth play is used repeatedly throughout the movie until it is ultimately performed during the climax. Julie, the mother, references it as the bloodiest of Shakespeare's works, as if to thematically justify its inclusion, but it honestly has a lot of competition in that arena. It makes the most sense in that its witches are evil women, sort of like vampires, so they could reasonably be played by vampires. Yeah, the other vampires also joined the play, because why not? As the Weird Sisters, they do that sensual handsy thing that has become popular with vampires. I first saw it in promos for the 2004 erotic dance show Bite, but I'm not sure where it comes from. While James Franco just looks on like, interesting take on Macbeth. I have 0 thoughts on this, and I'm certainly not turned on.
I did not direct that.
No, but you certainly encouraged Melanie Aikenhead to do something like that, didn't you? A male friend, Bob, played by Nick Eversman, who previously was in the 2010 Twilight parody Vampires Suck, is a rival for Leah's affections. He is a longtime friend of her, grew increasingly attracted to her as the years went on, and just when he makes his move, she turns out to be interested in Pearl. The way this is presented is evocative of the homophobic trope in which a lesbian vampire preys on a woman who would otherwise be interested in men, and then men have to save her from evil lesbianism and bring her back to wholesome heterosexuality. The Carmilla novella had shades of this, though it's ambiguous how much the men are supposed to be respected, so much as viewed as other antagonistic forces. And Vampire Lovers cemented the trope.
I wish Carl would come again. He's very handsome.
However, This trope is subverted by Leah turning out to actually be a lesbian. The fact that Pearl is a vampire is incidental to Leah's rejection of Bob. His continued presence as a guy hoping to get with her at first serves the purpose of straight baiting, and is later used to commentate on his sense of entitlement, similar to Buffy's rejection of Xander in Buffy Season 1. The Carmilla web series did something similar with references to Laura being interested in a TA named Danny.
Hey, Danny's gonna be there, that TA? Ugh. Will you come? Please come.
Yes, fine.
Yeah!
Only to then reveal that Danny is a girl.
Hey, everyone. Meet Danny Lawrence.
You were actually fans of a lesbian this entire time, you silly straight viewers. Leah and Pearl have their own sexy photo shoot, which goes on a really long time. It's not even really foreplay, it's just an extended series of clicks and negative flashes, while two attractive women exist in frame, mostly Pearl snapping pics of Leah. Is this a topping metaphor? I actually think it could be an homage to a scene in Dracula's Daughter, loosely inspired by Carmilla, where the titular vampire decides to test her ability to control her predatory impulses by being around a sexy young woman. She lures a woman to be her model, according to the scene direction before the censors got involved, also makes her strip down, and finds that she can't resist fang raping her. This was the first cinematic depiction of a lesbian vampire, though not the first adaptation of Carmilla, and I'm sure that the Mother May I Sleep with Danger filmmakers were aware of it, if they were actively incorporating self-aware queer theory ideas into the film. Despite Julie being conservative, Leah decides to introduce her to Pearl, saying that she's going to bring a special guest to dinner. Julie assumes that it's Bob, but then when Pearl shows up, she assumes it's just gals being pals, and has to be explicitly told that Pearl is Leah's girlfriend. Julie can't handle it, and it's framed as irrational homophobia, not intuitive insights like in the original, where Jessica senses Kevin's ill intentions. In the original, it's a woman being a respected defender of her daughter, who mistakes her mother's protectiveness as irrational animosity, while the audience wants Laurel to realize that Jessica is right and recognize Kevin as a threat. In the remake, it's complicated by the knowledge that Pearl is a vampire being pressured to turn Leah into a vampire herself, but the scene is otherwise a standard coming-out narrative, where the tension comes from Julie's inability to accept her daughter's sexual orientation. Pearl is not the source of tension Kevin is, because it's shown to us that she honestly cares about Leah, and the real danger comes from the other vampires, who may transfer their aggression through Pearl, but she is not the originator of that aggression. Now if only James Franco weren't involved! Bob continues acting like a creeper, challenging Leah on why she's not receptive to him. She tells him that she is not interested, that she's with Pearl, but he can't let it go and keeps creeping. Bob witnesses Pearl meet with the other vampires and discuss hunting, and he sees a vampire kiss her. Pearl doesn't fight her off, but she doesn't invite the kiss either. If Bob was being charitable, he might note her closed-off body language, but he interprets in the worst light and tells Julie that Pearl is bad news, and that Leah is in danger. He might be technically right, but he's portrayed as a bit of a creep in sounding the alarm. Julie demands that Leah stop seeing her, and Leah refuses, thinking that her mother is just homophobic. Unlike the original framing of the mother as entirely in the right, and the daughter enthralled by a psychopath, the remake frames Julie as only technically right, while also homophobic, while Leah has a good point in dismissing her. Pearl may be a threat, but we can understand the clan as the real danger. At this point, we get a reiteration of vampire queer theory, with the teacher hammering in that vampires represent the queer that needs reforming, the ostracized other. There's a montage of the lesbian vampires on the hunt, while displaying sexual dominance.
Okay, so then Dracula needed to be killed because of Victorian homophobia, but also because he was a murderer.
Right.
Instead of merely following in the footsteps of vampire lovers, where Carmilla picks off local girls as a straight-up evil lesbian monster, there's a twist where they prey on an unsympathetic victim, a man about to rape a woman at a party. They then behave in a sexually aggressive way toward him, evocative of Dracula's brides assaulting Jonathan Harker. The not-so-lesbian vampires now exhibit a bisexual display, while otherwise depicted as lady killers. While clearly spun as erotic to the straight male gaze of James Franco, the behavior has the qualities of a feminist interpretation of the monstrous feminine. Instead of women who kill men being framed as the highest evil from the perspective of men, they function as moralistic feminist monsters, delivering retribution to men who violate female-driven societal values. They're rape-revenge bottom feeders. The unsympathetic victim becomes the one who is othered, while the queer vampires are granted a degree of acceptance. In the swamp of Franco-led trashiness, there is a very real feminist element. It shares a fair bit of similarity with Lost Girl, whose protagonist, Beau, can be considered an energy vampire. It introduces itself with the premise of Beau subsisting on rapists before she learns how to feed without killing, and it has her rescue the deuteragonist, Kenzie, by eating a man trying to rape her. With a lot of care, Lost Girl navigates the feminist subversion of the monstrous feminine and makes an erotic show that doesn't feel exploitative. Mother May I Sleep with Danger has a decently constructed vampire eroticism in the subversion of the monstrous feminine, but you just know that Franco is ogling it from some position of power, and it does come off as gross. Julie investigates Pearl and learns that she isn't a real student. She takes a look at the photo lab, starts poring through Pearl's photos, and doesn't stop when she reaches the clearly erotic. Gross. She eventually reaches documented vampire attacks, which is pretty stupid on Pearl's part. She forbids Leah from seeing her, but Leah refuses because she loves her. The audience sees both sides as having a point, so it's more of a generic drama element than homophobia. Leah goes off and has a good time with Pearl. They do a few photo shoots and make out. Pretty much the only things this film has any of the lesbians do when they're not eating people. The not Karnsteins get impatient and confront Pearl.
Where's your girlfriend?
And that is Amber Coney. Imagine if Joss Whedon had a cameo as one of the random vampires in BDSM gear in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Pearl agrees to turn Leah and takes her on a midnight photo shoot, while Julie and the other vampires spy on them. Man, they're the most unobservant vampires ever. Pearl goes for the bite, but stops, and comes out to Leah, vamping out to show her. Leah doesn't take it well and leaves. The vampire queen, played by Zoe Siddell, threatens to turn Leah herself if Pearl doesn't, having a connotation of a sexual threat. Leah is positioned as a damsel in distress to be saved by Pearl, who is put into a bad place, where the action to rescue Leah from the queen is also bad. By the way, there's never any actual indication that this is the vampire queen, except that the credits indicate that there is a vampire queen, and a promo photo shows that it is this character. Nothing in the actual text has anything to do with there being a queen or actually any real hierarchy to the clan. The next class is on the 1862 poem Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti, about two sisters dealing with deceptively malicious goblin merchants who probably represent sexual awakening or something like that. The descriptions of goblin fruits sound sexual, with women's desire for the fruits sounding like lust. It's commonly interpreted as a feminist plot about women finding sexual satisfaction in an abusive patriarchal world by banding together themselves as lesbians. The poem is quoted in Mother May I Sleep with Danger to borrow the themes of lesbian sexuality and add sensuality and thematic depth. Leah calls her and makes a date for the cemetery at night. Of course, a perfect place to meet a vampire. They make up and make out, having the talk about Pearl being a vampire while having sex in the graveyard. An obvious point of comparison is to the 2017 Carmilla web series movie sex scene, one of the best depictions of lesbian sexuality I've seen. The Carmilla movie was directed by a gay man, Spencer Mabey, and he reportedly let the Lauren Carmilla actresses, Elise Bowman and Natasha Neko Van Liz, both bisexual women, decide how to do the scene. The queer filmmakers add a respectful framing to the lesbian sex scene, especially as the movie is marketed specifically toward lesbians, and not just the straight men and also lesbians demographic that we can imagine Mother May I Sleep with Danger was. with James Franco sharing half the fracking cover art. The film has the advantage of being directed by a woman who we might speculate to be sapphic in some respects, but we don't know for sure, don't know the orientation of the actresses, but can speculate that they're probably straight, and we can imagine Franco watching from off-frame and making suggestions. The Carmilla movie's sex scene is very respectful to the subjects as people. It's erotic, but the audiences are meant to identify with the characters instead of merely viewing them as spectacle. It has realism in its imperfection. Laura nibbles on Carmilla's shoulder, Carmilla smiles, and it looks improvised. It is not a perfect nibble shot. The actresses could conceivably go through the motions of the scene again and be better positioned and nail down the duration and timing to make it work as a sexual performance, but something would be lost by it. It would not look like a real sex scene, and even though we watch movies to see a perfection absent in real life, it damages the respectful eroticism to make the subjects appear less like real people and more like sexual objects. When Laura kisses Carmilla's leg, and Carmilla runs her fingers through Laura's hair, twirling it a little but not following through on the action 100%, it looks real. And we can imagine being Laura or Carmilla and deriving erotic appeal through that identification. That is something absent in the plasticky perfect straight men and lesbians aimed Mother May I Sleep with Danger sex scene. Leah and Pearl's body parts are put on display for the sake of erotic performance, and it's shiny and perfect with plenty of makeup, and is ultimately a disrespectful framing. There is also a bizarre tonal dissonance, where Pearl confesses her sins and sobs about being a vampire, after the sex chronologically takes place while all this eroticism plays out on screen, over her audio track. Both scenes make sense in the plot, but putting them together is weird. What's the point of playing a sex scene if the audience is weepy? Imagine if Buffy was like this.
How am I supposed to go on with my life, knowing what we had?
Pearl shares that the only way she can exist without killing people is by finding her one true love and making them a vampire, after which they can feed on each other. It's cheesy, but goes a long way to making the Carmilla figure sympathetic, and less creepy in her fixation on the Laura figure. Leah says that they love each other, so Pearl should vamp her, but Pearl refuses. She loves her too much to damn her. I would say to tell her about the clan and the queen and let her make an informed decision, but we get this tragic drama element instead. By the time Pearl does mention them, they show up, and Pearl makes Leah run for her life. After getting away, Leah tries to carry on and go to a Halloween masquerade ball with her mother. Bob, dressed as Dracula, goes full-on creep and roofies her as he tries to return her to heteronormativity, only for her to reject him in favor of Pearl, dressed as a black cat, the animal form of Carmilla.
It was a cat! A huge cat!
The other vampires show up in costume
Sometimes dead is better.
and drag Pearl away, while Bob swoops in to grab Leah as she succumbs to the roofie. He leads her off to rape her, only to become vampire chow as the righteous feminist monsters descend. The queen eyes Leah herself, and there is still a sexual threat there, even if they do go after rapey guys. Fortunately, Julie shows up, and the vamps bail. Leah wakes up the next morning with the realization that Bob drugged her. At the play, the vampires show up to play the Weird Sisters, and act particularly predatory. Leah recognizes them from the night before, finally realizing that she's in a play with vicious vampires. At the last minute, Bob shows up to play Macbeth, and it's pretty clear that he's a vampire now. Is he the first male vampire? How does that work? Leah confronts him about drugging her, and he as much as admits it before promising to kill her, slightly ambiguously, because his character kills her character, but it should be clear to her what he means. There's no reason she should still be there. She's in a confined space with 4 vampires who want to assault her. She should run away, but instead she thinks the show must go on.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
Well, at least they pull off a decent joke where the audience applauds about how intimidated she looks. What a brilliant performance! When it comes time for Macduff to kill Macbeth, Bob breaks character and says that he'll kill her because she had to go and be a lesbian and not be the girlfriend that he felt entitled to have. Now the vampire lover's template of male protectors of female heterosexuality has completely turned on its head. No longer is the vampire the ostracized queer, but the entitled male heteronormativity recognized as horrific in the framing of embraced female queerness. The vampires make their brutal attack, with all the speed of Michael Myers strolling after someone. Leah finally runs away, and the vampires give chase, thoroughly confusing the theatergoers. There's an inconsistency in how fast they're going. Pearl chases after the vampires with super speed. Leah is running at a human's pace. The other vampires are behind her. Being charitable, they're only toying with her, but still, Pearl should be able to catch up with them before Leah gets tired and stops. However, she doesn't. But Julie, the human running at a human's pace, does. It's a heroic effort to stop the vampires, except I'm scratching my head at the logistics of it. Unlike in the original film, the mother doesn't help much, and Pearl has to save the day. It's roughly equivalent to the scene in Carmilla where Spielsdorf attacks Carmilla and she responds with brutal aggression in a futile attempt to save herself. Unlike the morally ambiguous monster figure of Carmilla attacking a morally ambiguous human, while Laura ambiguously watches, Pearl uses brutal aggression against the obviously evil vampires to save Leah as the Laura figure, who earnestly wants Pearl to do so. While Pearl is occupied, Leah tries to save her mother from Vampire Bob by bludgeoning him to the true death.
I love you.
That's pretty awesome, actually. However, it's too late. Julie is dead. After sobbing over her body, Leah demands that Pearl do it, change her into a vampire. Pearl agrees and bites her. It hurts, but Leah comes out of the induced change as a vampire like Pearl. They presumably unlive happily ever after. It's probably the best way they could end that. It's fairly sweet. I like that the Carmilla story could get a happy ending in vampire terms, not in human ones. In that respect, it's a bit like Let the Right One In. Unfortunately, there's a thematically confusing epilogue where the evil vampires turn out to have survived. Yes, the blonde gets killed by glass, but this vampire survives. Whatever. They're out actively killing people, and now that Bob is there to influence them with his wicked patriarchal ways, they prey on women without reservation. The film actually ends on the bad guys' revelry. It reminds me of the werewolf scene in Trick or Treat, but that at least has an element of sympathy toward the sexy werewolves, and schadenfreude toward an unsympathetic victim, to make it appreciable as a bit of thematic kink. The vampire scene is just patriarchal cruelty in a supposedly feminist narrative, being spun as thematic kink. It doesn't work. The ending was made in homage to the ending of the original film, where we see Kevin back on the prowl, after having finally given up on his efforts to own Laurel and escaping the climax. This works much better with Kevin because he's in central focus as the homme fatale. Is previously shown to have engaged in a predatory romance before Laurel, and is only human and is not a literal monster targeted with lethal action. It works to have the hint that the human predator is still out there, targeting women just like you, because that's what would resonate with the female audience of Lifetime. By making him a vampire and no longer the central focus, as Bob, bringing him back no longer resonates, and just comes into conflict with the feminist themes. I suspect this is a result of James Franco insisting that the film has to end on something creepy. Themes be damned. With regard to the film as a loose adaptation of Carmilla, it also interestingly fits in with the end of the novella, where Laura discusses a feeling that Carmilla survived and is waiting just outside her door. And Michael Myers' body is nowhere to be found. But this specifically works with the story with Carmilla as the villain figure. In the same way that the Mother May I Sleep with Danger remake ending fails as an allusion to the original film, it also fails to recreate what works about the ending of Carmilla. Carmilla is the central sleep with danger, femme fatale figure, and it makes sense for her to make a dramatic comeback in a way similar to Kevin, but Bob, as a subordinate character, does not warrant it. What does that even mean for the message? Even vengeful feminist rape revenge vampires will become submissive to patriarchal men and will turn into evil lesbian vampires? Overall, the film is okay. It's a trashy lesbian vampire movie that knows what it is on some level, but also wants to be something more than what it is. And it's disappointing that it can't be as thematically interesting as it strives to be. What there is, though, is intriguing. I like the vampire queer studies, the self-aware probing at erotic horror, the way that Carmilla is adapted to a progressive lesbian love story, where the leads can achieve happiness together, and the attempts at feminist themes with the rape revenge bottom-feeding part. It's just thematically confused, generally a poorly told story, and impossible to ignore that there's always skeevy James Franco pulling the strings from the background. It's not a good film, but it has some things going for it, and I can see how it could have been better, so it's ultimately disappointing. Please like, share, subscribe, and consider donating to my Patreon. Pledges of $2 or more will earn you an explicit thank you at the end of each video. Thank you.